It's amazing how people just step up their debt load as their income streams increase. It's actually kind of sad.
Yeah,
But
mind blowing.
it's true. That's what's happening.
Yeah.
So what advice do you give to us then?
In which regard? Be more specific.
In that, just with like to posture ourselves financially.
To prepare yourself to be a little bit better
Yes.
financially. My wife's uncle works in California, makes a lot of makes really good money for California wages, right? And he jokingly talks about it's not so much how much you make, but it's how much you can hold on to. It's kind of like a faucet, right? And as you put your hands out, it's how much can you cup and hold and keep
Yes.
without it spilling over and doing it.
Totally.
So I'd say try to train yourself for delayed gratification, right? Something that I don't know where this developed, but I try not to buy something the first time I see it. If I'm in Target and my wife sees a T-shirt on the end cap and goes, "Oh my gosh, I love that T-shirt, I want it." Like, well, it's really not what we came for, and if you want to buy it, buy it. But I would recommend you're going to be here at Target next week. Why don't you wait till next week? And if you want it as bad the second time you see it, then don't think twice, buy it. But 9 times out of 10, if we delay that purchase, even just a few days, even a week, it's amazing how much that desire to buy it goes away.
Today, we had a super special guest. Why is he so special to you, Ben?
So when I first started my business, Ben McAfee kind of put his arm around me as, you know, someone who has more experience, a few years older, and he really helped me, you know, get going, start my momentum with business. And now we work together in a lot of different ways, but he's a really good example of paying it forward. He taught us today how to get momentum, and that's by taking the first step. And he also taught us you can't undervalue work ethic.
Yeah, for sure. I think something that was really powerful for me is delaying gratification so
Yeah.
that we can qualify to get that first home, so we can build that momentum. But something that was really cool is he said, when you look at something to buy, just wait 1 week, you know, and if you still want to buy it after a week, then go for it. But that's just...
So you might want to have your wife listen to this episode.
Yes, have your wife listen to this episode.
No, but if you're trying to start a business, or if you're just trying to break through into real estate, this is a great episode to listen to. Hope you enjoy it. This episode is brought to you by Big Storage Ventures. We are now inviting you to team up and partner alongside us. We bring our experience hunting storage deals and maximizing the self-storage asset to provide our partners with cash flow, tax benefits, and appreciation, all in one recession-resistant asset. Leverage our sister company, Big Ben's Moving Service, to fill your facility and give you an edge over the competition. Reach out to bigstorageventures@gmail.com or DM Big Storage Ventures on Instagram to team up.
I would love to hear your story because I haven't heard it, but something that we were talking about before we got here I thought was really interesting. You were telling us about the way you were raised and how you were raised to work really hard on Saturdays in the mornings, and then you can go play in the afternoon. I think it'd be cool to elaborate a little bit on that. Like, where were you raised and how did that lesson come?
So I think context matters. And in the conversation that we were having before we started the podcast, we're talking about the heat of St. George.
Yeah.
And many people recreate in the morning in the cooler hours and then leave the afternoon or the rest of the day to take care of their chores, their to-do list, whatever the miscellaneous jobs and duties are. I was raised by two parents who both worked outside the home. One of their greatest examples and things that they passed on to me is a work ethic. But it was always preached, and it was always just part of our core that we're going to work hard together as a family unit, but we're going to play equally as hard in the afternoon.
Love it.
That's been something hard for me in moving to St. George, born and raised in Utah County, right? And being down here, if you want to recreate, you kind of need to do it in the morning when you're in the heat of summer.
Or buy a boat.
But even a boat, right? It's still morning hours tend to be better.
Yeah,
right?
that's a good point.
So that, context to that.
I love that. I think that's a really cool lesson. And so, what was it that your parents did, or you guys would do on Saturdays? Was it like working on the chores, or were you guys on a farm or something?
Yeah. So both of my parents worked. My mother started as a telephone operator. Obviously, throughout her career, operators kind of disappeared, right? But she continued to work for the phone company. And my father was a school teacher, but also did some administrative work as well. I followed their example. They were real estate investors in the sense that they lived in the Orem-Provo area, and just every so often, as often as they financially could, would buy a property near BYU campus. So watching their examples, they managed all the units, right? And when they say they managed, it meant the family worked on Saturdays to take care of the rentals, right? So whether it was yard work, whether it was a tenant moving out and prepping it for a new tenant to come in with cleaning it, from A to B or A to Z.
Cleaning the frat house.
Exactly. So they both worked full time. So Saturdays was the time that you rolled up the sleeves and worked as a family. So many examples of work ethic and even from the financial investing standpoint.
Well, yeah, there's the twofold, like you said, to be able to learn from your parents about getting into real estate investments and things like that. I think that's really cool because not everyone grows up with that. So then help me. I know you do mortgages in town. So how does one like you get into that business?
Oh my goodness. I don't think anyone when you're in elementary school says I want to grow up to be a mortgage loan officer. I don't think I've ever heard someone say
or
that.
a mover
Or a mover.
or a storage unit manager, right?
Yes. So I think those type of industries, obviously there's a connection, a crossroads somewhere in someone's life. But mine came from my best friend in high school, married. His wife was working in a closing and funding department of the mortgage company that hired me. Her brother happened to be the manager of the particular branch, and so I got to know them through my best friend courting her, right? But it all kind of peaked at their wedding. I played a little bit of maybe an inappropriate practical joke on them, but it required me to interact with just about everyone who was in the line. And so her brother watched me kind of work the crowd a little bit.
Yeah.
Just the people skills of asking people to get involved with an inappropriate joke. And at the end, he approached me and said, hey, what are you doing with your life? What are you doing for work? And the conversation started there and kind of led into a career. So
the lesson is inappropriate jokes lead to career paths, right?
Yes.
You mentioned context matters. We don't have to get into context of that. That'd be entertaining. After off air, we can.
Well, I have a special deleted scene. You could pay extra to hear the actual inappropriate joke.
That's really cool. What I love about that too is just someone recognizing, and just your everyday interactions. I was having a conversation with Nate Holt about that today. Just there was an investor that was looking at investing in storage units with us, and when he had this meeting, he brought like his whole team. Like he brought his finance guy, he brought his tax guy, he brought his guys, to come and vet us and the opportunity. And one of them used to work for a bank, was the banker, this guy with a lot of money, and they interacted and they had such a good relationship. He's like, why don't you just come work with me?
Yeah.
Bring him in-house. So it's kind of cool.
Yeah. Well, I think the observation that was made, going back to my story, was his name is Paul. Paul told me, we can't teach people how to interact and have people skills. That's either you have it or you don't.
Soft skills.
It's something hard to necessarily develop if you don't have it. Not saying that you can't, but he said, we can teach you the business. We can teach you mortgages, but that's kind of an innate characteristic that is needed to really be successful in that line of work.
And soft skills matter, right? Like I think for me, I learned a lot of my soft skills on my mission, right? That you don't really realize how much asking good questions, being a good listener, right? Like those subtle lessons that go so far in business, and they don't teach you in college. There's not like a soft skills degree.
Sure.
But I would argue that soft skills make you more money than a lot of the hard skills,
Yeah.
right? Because you can negotiate, you can read people, right?
Yeah.
I think it's very fascinating.
Yeah.
So how old were you when this happened and he brought you into the mortgage game? Had you worked any other jobs before that?
I was working construction, going to school, trying to figure out what I wanted to do when I grew up, right?
Right.
When I came home from serving an LDS mission, my mother put a ton of emphasis, had some influence on me by saying, you can do any job that you want, but I highly recommend pick some kind of skill that you can use, almost like a life insurance policy, something in your back pocket, that if things don't go as planned in your career path, that you have something to fall back on. So she was referring to the trades, right? My brother framed when he got back from his mission. I worked for a paint contractor, new construction. So it was following my mom's advice on that. But I'm a hard worker, I didn't mind the work, but it definitely isn't something I wanted to do the rest of my life. And so when that opportunity came up, I thought, well, why not, right? Why not pursue it? And never thought I would look back 16 years later and think I would still be, originating mortgages. So.
Well, and that's my other line of thinking is, I could see if you're young trying something out, but you stayed for 16 years. So you must like it or really good at it. But what is kind of your thoughts on that or on for being in this game for so long?
Yeah. I think when you look at mortgages, what makes a good originator, and this is my opinion, right? You split it in half. The first half of it is the marketing, the lead generating, kind of the grinding sales mentality, the sales side of it.
The networking.
Mm-hmm. The networking. The other half of it is you got to know your craft, right? You got to be able to originate it. In my office, we often refer to it as contract to close. It's a conveyor belt of once a home is under contract, do you navigate that conveyor belt looking ways to shorten the conveyor belt and speed it up, right?
Yeah.
And it comes up to the individual loan officer how well they can navigate that.
So some attention to the processes, attention to detail has, you kind of started just this guy recruited you in, and now you'd be modest about it, but you've kind of risen to the top of, you've been a part of the leadership team on various mortgage companies. And I feel like it's basically what you said, like knowing your craft, being sharp at what you do. Obviously the hard work ties in, and the soft skills of being able to work with people, that all ties into how it all shakes out, right?
Mm-hmm. Totally agree. Talking to my loan partner, Rachel Alton, before the podcast, she made a comment saying, highlighting the fact that where I am at in my career is by paying attention to the details, and being proactive rather than reactive. Identify the problems before they become a problem, right? And I think that really has played a big part in my career.
And I want to tell you, Callan, I mean, I don't think we shared this with you, but how I met Ben was I was a super green new entrepreneur, and I got introduced to BNI, to networking, right? And Ben was one of the people that very first, like, I brought almost no value, right, to the new chapter, right, to Ben and to the other people that were there. But he put his arm around me. He's always been good over the years to just, give before looking for anything back. I think that's a huge, like, testimony to your character, and probably why, people have given you their business is because you're providing value first. And it's been fun. Like, about once a year, me and Ben will sit down in his office and he'll just be like, let's check in. Like, he gives me some advice. I really like this. You should think about doing this. And it's really fun to learn from Ben. And now we just bounce ideas off each other all the time. So
yeah, I agree with that. And those conversations are fun. The more people you talk to, the different angles and perspectives that they have, and gives you things to marinate on and chew
So
on.
I wanted to ask you this. Now you deal a lot, like you've learned stuff outside of mortgage. I want to talk about your hard money business. Maybe you could explain that. And then a follow up too is you rub shoulders with a lot of successful, wealthy people. So I want to hear what common things you see in those people.
Okay.
You could do the hard money first and then go into the
How'd you
successful
get into
traits.
hard money?
Sure. So the hard money side of it, I'll just give you a little bit of background of what kind of got me into it. I think being in the business in general, you hear about hard money, private money, bridge lenders. You tend to have this stigma about them that they're sharks, right? They're high interest, high fees. They almost want you to go into default, which is kind of the stigma that I had in the back of my mind.
Yeah.
This all came about a little bit of a side hustle that my wife and I do. Is there was a builder that I was doing a lot of work for at the time, still do a lot of work for him. Went to lunch with him and I just asked. This was back before some of the regulations came out where a lender could see the settlement statement for the seller side of a transaction, and you could see who was being paid off on construction loans. And I saw it was individuals. It was private LLCs, not banks and credit unions like you would typically think you would see. So I remember asking the question to the builder, why? Why are you not using, I knew enough about their financial situation that they would be like the perfect ideal client for your mainstream banks for preferred interest rates, et cetera.
Yeah.
And he made a point to me that really changed my paradigm in that lunch appointment. And he said, you're looking at it as very isolated from interest rate and fees.
Mm-hmm.
But for me to work with banks and be working on 20 to 30 transactions at a time, I have to hire an extra person in my office just to manage those loans.
Wow. So
you got to equate that cost and overhead into that equation. And at that point, are you really saving anything? Right?
Yeah.
I remember having the distinct thought that this private money, doing private bridge loans and construction loans, isn't higher risk. It's more like a convenience store. You're going to pay a little bit more money for a gallon of milk at Maverick as you would at Walmart.
Yes.
It doesn't mean that the quality of milk is any different, right? It doesn't mean the person putting it on their credit card has the ability to pay or not pay that bill.
Yeah.
It comes down to convenience, and people pay for convenience, efficiencies, right? And I couldn't shake that thought. And I started researching it more and more. Went back to that builder months later and said, hey, if I had enough money to do a construction loan, would you let me do one? A little bit scared because I've never done the process myself, right?
Right.
So,
to me, that would be like really overwhelming. That'd take a lot of guts to say, hey, I'm going to lend on a construction loan now.
yeah. Well, and what I did from there, right? Once he said, yeah, the next deal I have come across my table, I'll be happy to pitch it to you. Part of the reason is if I'm doing the long-term loans for this builder, if I'm going out and doing the inspections for these construction draws, how many less phone calls and emails will he have to respond to with me asking for status updates?
Yeah.
So there's some efficiency added to him as well. But I started surrounding myself and finding out who else in town is doing these. Do I have relationships with any of those people? Would any of them be willing to share some tips and tricks and maybe some wins and failures? So started pounding the phones, and I was surprised at the amount of people that were willing to help, willing to give suggestions, even to the point where I had another construction lender do a few draw inspections with me.
Wow.
Point out what he's looking for, what questions he would take back to the builder before they wrote a check.
That's amazing.
So I gobbled up as much information as I could, just soaked it all up. And I quickly realized after the first deal, my background in residential lending prepared me for that way more than I anticipated. I didn't need to fear nearly as much as I did at the beginning. Right.
Well, two things I want to point out that I really like. First one is your businesses layer on top of each other, right? So your first business, that's kind of your cash cow. Then you have your real estate that is directly tied, like your knowledge that you learned in originating mortgages helps you in what you invest in real estate. You have a good real estate portfolio. And then it also complements your hard money thing. I think a lot of people see, they get shiny object syndrome where they say, oh, I have one business, but this one looks like a really smart idea too, but they have nothing to do with each other. So I think that's a really strong, it makes me look at what you're doing as a whole as more solid than someone who's going to jump from thing to thing to thing. The other thing I want to point out is that you had, the courage, the humility, everything it takes to reach out to someone who knows more than you. They could reject you, right? And you said, hey, like, I have this idea. I want to be a hard money lender. I know you know how. And I don't know if you got rejected at all, but it sounds like everyone was pretty nice. And I found that to be the case too with storage investing, right? When you reach out to people, I haven't got any like harsh rejection, right? Some people give more than others, but
I'm a huge believer in pay it forward, right?
yes.
I've seen people do it for me in my career, both with my bread and butter, my cash cow, if you will, and the side hustles. I preach that to anyone that I manage, right? Mm-hmm. That if someone took the time out of their day, their busy schedule to help you, remember that when the roles reverse. You got to pay it forward. And I think people who are successful want to share their successes and lend a hand. I think that is the case more often than not.
Because it's not real success unless you're paving a path for someone else too. And you've shown that, like I mentioned in BNI, you've mentored me, you mentored my wife. Everyone in there has had a good opportunity to at least get some value from you before you get any back, which is cool.
I got to give some of that credit. I come from a family of educators, right? My grandfather was a superintendent of Provo School District. My dad was an administrator and school teacher himself. My brother still is in administration, was a teacher, principal at Provo High. I got two other siblings that are elementary school teachers. It is like in my blood that I really do love to share ideas and concepts. There's nothing that makes my heart grow when I see something click as we're talking through, especially with financial literacy. Our school systems just don't do a good job of teaching financial literacy. And
right.
There are kids that are coming out of school and even high school and college that just don't know where to start. So part of that stems from a passion of mine that I feel like we lack in financial literacy and need to pass that on as often as we can.
Yeah, and this is kind of a side tangent, but I'll say too, for anyone who's, young, looking to just get in the game, a crash course in financial literacy, it is one piece of that. One of your pillars is getting in touch with a mortgage officer, a loan officer, because a key to getting wealthy is real estate. The first step is to get in touch with a loan officer to basically get you qualified, right? It's a big thing that we don't learn in school, how to know when you're qualified for a loan, what the steps are, what you have to do. And they can also help you with creative ways to get wealth. My friend Dylan, Dylan, Dylan Hurt. I think he'd be cool with me sharing this story, but he was going to sell his house, his condo, and he was for his new place. I was like, dude, just refinance it and get a new house and then be a landlord. And he's like, what? I'm like, go talk to Ben. I texted him Ben's number. Next day, he's like, dude, thank you. Like, I have a whole new vision for my future wealth, right? It's just like, obviously we're partial to Ben, Momentum Mortgage here in St. George, but all across the country, it doesn't really matter whoever's listening. Like, don't be afraid to go call a loan officer. Don't call a realtor. Don't call them because they're probably not a good realtor is not going to give you the time of day unless you're qualified. Go get some financial literacy from a loan officer first.
But I want to add to that, right?
Yeah.
I think you'll quickly find when you make those phone calls, there are certain loan officers that are transactional, and there's those that are looking at it as a relationship. Often when I meet with a client, I want to know what their end goals are, not just the here and the now with the current transaction. What are your goals and aspirations 3 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road?
Yes.
Let's put a path together, not for just one transaction, but put you on the right path for the next 2 or 3, right? And so you want to make sure that you're partnering with a loan officer that understands that, and can truly do some planning, kind of like a CPA. You got certain CPAs that say, give me your historical data from last year. I'll plug them in the system and I'll tell you how much you owe. Yeah. Well, you often want to lock arms with a CPA that's helping you do some tax planning, that you're preparing, saying, what can we be doing today that might help my tax returns in 2 or 3 years from now? So hope it's okay that I added that.
No,
into
please.
your
and what you just said, it applies to our business, Big Store Adventures, right? So we do the same thing. When you said we're not just transactional, you're trying to get the big picture. We meet with people that want to be a part of storage deals, and we'll say, okay, with your appetite, right, you need a return soon, right? Maybe someone that's just getting in the game. You might be a good candidate for an acquisition that already has occupancy. So we'll wait till we find an acquisition to bring you in the deal. You, Mr. $100 million company owner, you just want the best bang for your buck. We'll put you in a development, right? And so we meet with people, find out their goals before we assign them or partner with them on a certain deal. Another example is we had a guy who was going to take out a HELOC on his house to be a part of a storage deal with this current market, right? And we looked at this specific deal. I'm sure if rates were different, sometimes taking a HELOC might make a little sense, but right now it definitely does not. So we kind of talked him out of doing the deal with us. So I think I see how we do it in our business and how you're really playing the long game. And that's a lesson I take from what you're saying.
Oh, can I add a story to that?
Yeah, please.
This was maybe 10 years ago. Got a referral. I don't even know where the referral originated from, but they had met with a local credit union on a potential refinance. And they were just coming to me for a second opinion. They just felt like the closing costs seemed a little bit high. Yeah, they were going to save a couple $100 on their mortgage, but it was going to take years for them to break even. Mm-hmm. So in the first 15, 20 minutes of talking, even before we started doing any number crunching, understanding that they were going to be going away to med school in the next couple of years. And I asked them, do you plan to keep this as a rental or do you plan to sell it? And it was very, very clear they had zero interest in holding on to it. And I said, well, let's this conversation can wrap up pretty quick because your break even to do this refi, even saving a couple $100, is more in the 5 to 6 year range. You're going to sell the house long before that. Don't refi. Yeah. Don't do it. Well, she worked at a salon doing hair as her career. I got more referrals from that lady in the next 2 years because what do they do for a living? They small talk. Yeah. They're chatting, right?
Or nail techs.
And
gossip.
She ended up being one of my top referral partners in that next couple of years because I told her no.
Yes.
Right. But I think mortgages, I joke often with clients that we're like a mechanic, at least from my standpoint. I know nothing about cars. I know nothing about mechanics. I have to completely trust when I take my car in. If you say it needs to be done, I got to trust you because I don't know otherwise. And I think a lot of people come in with mortgages and need to trust a lender. They have their best interest in mind. That trust level is so important in the mortgage industry.
Yeah. Is Nate Holt in the BNI?
Yeah.
With you guys? Anyway, I was just talking to him today. He kept saying the same thing. He's like transactional representatives versus relationship. Like he used the same words today, which I thought was really cool. And I also, just to add to that, I mean, I don't want to digress with, the whole mechanic analogy, but it's so true. There is a mechanic. I got to give him a shout out. Paxman Automotive. He's taken really good care of my dad over these years, but every time I go to him, he'll be like, he just always treats people right. And he does, like, it really, really pays dividends. And I'm just so grateful for that, to have someone I trust that can take good care of us and tell us what we need, what we don't need. And you want to send people over to them. It's just really cool to have.
Yeah. That's way better than putting tons of money into billboard ads, right? Right. Yes. I mean, it's the right way, in my opinion, to do business.
Absolutely.
If you treat people right, the money will follow. It may not follow as quick as you want it to, right? But playing that long game, if you put people first, the money will follow.
I love that. And it seems like that's a way that you've held yourself and your business, and probably a way that you've been successful with what you do. There's the founder and owner of Enterprise Rent-A-Car. He has a famous quote that says, if you take care of your customers and your employees, profits will follow.
Yeah.
That's like one of his famous quotes. And it's true from what you guys are saying. I mean, I love hearing stories about that. Yeah. You know, something that also came to my mind too with mortgages, and you mentioned like people, it's funny that like until you go through that process to say, hey, where am I at? And have someone like you say, hey, you qualify for this, or your income's here, and you kind of like work on all these components and puzzle pieces together. It helps influence your behavior, because now you're like, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't get a loan on this, or maybe I should pay these down, or like you can strategize better in your life.
Having a plan, right? Knowing where you're at and where you're going dictates so many different decisions, and actually gives you an avenue for delayed gratification, right? If you don't know where you're at, you're tempted to buy a new pickup, right?
Yes.
If you don't have a vision on what that choice will do or not do for you in the future, and so I tell many clients, work it backwards. If you know where you're going and what you want, then we can put a number and work those numbers backwards, and then the decisions become easy. It's easy to walk away from wanting something now if you know where you're going, right?
100%.
So I believe that for my own personal finances, as well as just creating wealth, right? Just see the consumerism is how many people just get gobbled up by consumerism.
Mm-hmm.
So
no, that's
absolutely. I was gonna jump back in to now. I mean, it's fair to say that you have a lot of high net worth people around you that you get to rub shoulders with, and I think it's really cool to take a second and like talk about the commonalities you see. And maybe we were getting into it a little bit with just having the end in mind, but what are other traits you see in successful people?
My mind goes a lot of different directions when you ask that question, because am I success with some of my colleagues, fellow loan officers, people in the industry? Am I looking at successful clients that come with maybe a high net worth? So my mind is spinning, but I will tell you, one of the greatest benefits that I feel like I have as an originator is we review tax returns. People financially get naked for us more than pretty much any other industry, right? Because if you go to a financial planner, you're usually talking about assets. You don't get as into the weeds with liabilities. Mm-hmm. Some do, but we look at it all: credit, income, and assets. So when
there's no way around it with a traditional.
There's not. So when we look at tax returns, it gives me an opportunity to see the different side hustles that people have. How did they get into it? Right. My own little interviews that I get to have, and to ask them what are some of their wins and what are some of their failures. Right. What are the lessons they've learned? And some of my investment strategies when it comes to real estate has greatly been impacted by others who hold real estate and point me in different directions. One of the best advice I had was a guy who had a pretty decent little real estate portfolio, and I asked him, for someone who is managing their own small portfolio of just a couple units, what advice do you have for me? What are some of your lessons from your earlier days? And I'll just share that same advice here. He said, make sure that you walk through every unit with the applicant. Some people will put a lockbox on the door, right? Yeah. So potential tenants can walk it, saves them time from having to go out and show it, right?
Yeah.
But he said, make sure you show your properties and walk them to their car. They are going to treat the car the same way they treat your house. And if they're too lazy to pick up their McDonald's wrappers, their Maverick cups, and take them to the garbage on the way in, they're going to do that to your house on the inside as well. So not saying that it has to be perfectly clean, right? My car's not perfectly clean, but they're going to treat your house the same way they treat your car. That was a huge moment for me. I adopted that immediately, and I found myself picking better tenants to go in my units that took care of the units longer, reducing my maintenance costs, less wear and tear on the systems. Yeah. So in answer to that question is, I've been privileged to ask those type of questions to people because I see their tax returns, right?
Right.
But I think collectively, if I'm trying to summarize and put everybody in the same bucket,
Mm-hmm.
They have an end in mind. They usually have a vision, they have a passion, and they're all proactive. There's a lot of people, and I feel like I'm just going into tangents on some of this, but
That's the whole point.
if you were to ask 100 different people if it's smart to invest in real estate, I'm willing to say that survey would come back in the high 90s. Absolutely yes.
Yeah.
Then why is it that no one does? Or why is it that it's down to 2 or 3% who do? We put excuses in front of us. Even though we know things are smart, we're unwilling to take action, and we paralyze ourselves and then come up with excuses why.
Yes.
Well, interest rates are too high, right? Well, it doesn't cash flow. I'm going to be getting a raise. Our car's about ready to need to be replaced. You can come up with 100,000 different excuses on why to delay doing that. So I think the common thread in success are those who take action rather than just talk about it.
It hits hard, right? Because I feel like I see that every single day, right? Someone says they want to do something, and I literally hurt for them because it's like, you're gonna do it someday. Let's just take you could do. We see it a lot in just general real estate, like getting into real estate, specifically in storage. We see it too, where people always say, "Oh, I've always wanted to own storage units." Like, what's the wait? Let's do it. Let's do a deal, And so, but I think you see it with people, oftentimes, maybe it's just on my mind because we're talking about it with you, but it's just like buying that first home or that first rental property. It's like, that is attainable and you can get it. And you just got to strategize, put a plan together, and it's right there.
But it's also the first barrier of entry, right? Once you do that first transaction, you realize, oh my gosh, it wasn't as bad as I thought, right? It wasn't as difficult. You vision all these horror stories happening, and none of them happen. None of them come to fruition. And then the second one's easier. The third one is easier. And then you start getting that momentum rolling in your direction. But it's that first step is the most important. And I don't know if anyone's listening here and you're on the fence, be brave enough to take the first step, because the next 2 or 3 will be a lot easier.
Well, that's something that I really admire a lot about Ben, that I have to compliment him for, is because he's been one of those guys that has taken action, and it's a lot, like you said, a lot of people learn things, but not everyone will take the step and take the action to do it. And there's a lot of excuses. I mean, I think about even just myself, like, we talk ourselves down a lot. I think some people do, not everyone, but like, when we were going to school, Ben was buying houses and I was like, I can't afford a house. Like, that was the mindset that was going in my mind. Whereas one of my classmates, who same income, same situation, we're both going to school, we're not making any money, and he bought a fourplex. Yeah. The bank gave him money for a fourplex.
He found a
like,
deal.
What the
good
heck?
enough.
They counted the income that was already in there, and but that's the difference, the paradigm. So I hope that if nothing else, maybe you can help me and everyone else listening to see if we can break that in our minds. Because I think that's what's so powerful about talking to you guys.
Let's talk about my kids. I got a 4-year-old and 7-year-old. They both have this characteristic. They're not okay with the answer no. If they want something, they're going to find a way to ask me for it 4 different ways. And then when I say no to each different angle that they approach, they run into mom to ask the same questions. Why are we as adults not willing to go, okay, here's a barrier, or maybe it's a barrier that I put on myself, right?
Yes.
Rather than saying, well, let's turn over every stone along the way to find out if it was possible. What if we get to the end and find out that it's still not possible? What do we lose? A little bit of time?
Yeah.
So be it, right? But so often along the way, we realize that it's doable, and then we break through that paradigm. So
I think it's fun to look at from the childlike view.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously as adults, we have to calculate more, and we're more careful creatures than kids for different reasons. But if you can create an environment for yourself where you're able to have that childlike ability to dream and be persistent, there's some real insight in that.
And I love the dream, but how about just the treat that's in the pantry, right? Like if there's something that you want and someone's telling you no, I guarantee there's a way if you just take a different angle, right? Big and small, big dreams as well as the small things. Find a way. You know, that's one thing I like about Rich Dad Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki. If there's something that you want, right? Think about it, brainstorm it enough, you can probably find a way to pay for it, and it's not necessarily coming out of your cash cow, right?
Yeah.
My wife and I have been privileged to buy a cabin. I always thought, even earlier on in my mortgage career, that when I retire, we'd love to have a family cabin. I started thinking, why wait? Why wait?
Yeah.
Buy the cabin now, and we put it up on the nightly rental, and it covers its cost. And yet we still get some benefit out of it, and maybe not year round, right? But
Are you going to be there year round?
no, right, exactly. So let the asset work for itself and help cover its own expense. So
Yeah, and when you put yourself out there, you open yourself up to opportunity. Callan shared a story about his classmate who believed that they could find a deal good enough that the asset was healthy enough that the bank would loan on it, even though it sounds like he didn't have any good books or anything like that.
That's the point. Is we're in the exact same situation. I know we talked, but he's not limiting himself. One, he's not saying, "Well, I can't afford it. I don't have any money." He's going for it and finding the angles. He found a way. He found the place, and I just think it's really powerful. I'm like, holy cow! But the other thing that I was kind of saying earlier, when you go and talk to someone like yourself, and you can go over those things, like it opens your mind. And it's motivating because it helps you take action steps, because now you have that reason. Because sometimes it's hard for us to feel motivated and feel like, oh, what am I saving up money for? Or why am I delaying my gratification? Whenever I see everyone posting on social media, I see all these people doing these things. And then you lose sight of that vision, and you lose sight of that path, and you don't know how to get there, take those action steps. That's why it's like talking with someone like you who can say, look, if you do these things, or even you asking, I mean, what are some of the questions you ask when people come in? You probably ask for the vision, because that was one of your number one things. What's your end goal? Or you tell me, what do you ask people? But it's like having someone tell you that and then say, okay, I can help you get there. And you actually know how to do that.
Yeah. And some people come in with a desire of, I want to be a real estate investor. I don't know where to start. Mm-hmm. And then I have others that are just like, we want to buy a house, and it ends there, right? Mm-hmm. But it also is really important to find out just basic getting to know someone.
Yes.
Where are they at?
And
in
you
their
do
life?
that. I was gonna say, just there's little details that you can find out just asking about, who are you? What do you do for fun? What kind of family you got? What do you do for work? Right? That helps him understand, like, okay, here's how this person's life is structured. Here's what makes them happy, right?
Yeah, where are they going with their career? Are they looking for a career change, right? Mm-hmm. Those type of things help me consult better, and at least help people find their vision, right? Yes. I think a lot of people go through life without any vision. They just go through the motions, and I actually feel bad for those individuals.
100%.
I feel like they're missing that passion that life offers, and just going through the motions. I think they're the ones that get caught up in consumerism as well. Yeah. So anyway.
Yes, that's a good point.
Be willing to dream and vision cast your life. Take that time once or twice a year to really set aside a day, an hour or an hour or two, and just write and think about who you want to be. Another thing I wanted to highlight is, talked about, no pun intended, because your company is called Momentum, but momentum, right? Just getting the ball rolling is that first step that a lot of people need. I have this lady at my CrossFit gym, which she has this weird thing. She makes herself come to the gym, and it's part of like her, I don't understand everything about it, but she makes herself drive to the gym. And if she still doesn't feel like going, like today, this happened, she walked back out. And so, I mean, there's double-edged to that, because
she makes herself go no matter what.
She every single day she drives to the gym. Some days she doesn't some days she just walks in the door, says hi to everybody, and walks back out. And I don't understand that part of it, but the idea is that
more times out of not.
More times out of not. more times than not. More times than not, she stays and she does the workout, right? And so I don't know. It's a small plug for CrossFit. Is like it's a certain time. It's written down. Obviously, we've talked about CrossFit before, but the point is I'm not a super rigid guy compared to a lot of successful people where they have, I take a cold plunge at 4 a.m. I work out at this time. I do this. I do this. I do this. I read a book every day. And it's like, yeah, that's not really me, but I do understand the momentum. And for me, certain things like, making commitments that I can keep to myself, not waking up at 4 a.m., not doing the cold plunge every day, but hey, I'm going to go to the gym every day. I have a system set up to build momentum. I have accountabilities, factors for myself. So I just really liked how you highlighted momentum, and the first step. One more example is just missionary work, right? When you're a full-time missionary, what's the hardest thing to do is just get out of the door.
Yeah.
Once you knock one door or once you go contact one person, you have momentum.
Yes.
But it's really tough to do that first one.
So I want to go back to the lady that you're talking about at the gym.
Yes.
I would like to ask her, has she ever gone to a workout that she really didn't want to, right?
Yeah.
And at the end say, man, I wish I wouldn't have done that. I'm willing to say 9 times out of 10, maybe 100% of the time is I'm really glad I did it. Even though I didn't want to, I'm glad I did. It's just an interesting correlation with that. Just get it started.
I don't necessarily want to highlight her as a hero because I think she should do the workout. The point is,
but what I mean is the ones that she does, even though she doesn't want to.
Right.
I hear what you're saying.
There are certain things I do, and my wife drags me to go do them,
Yes.
right? And I do them a little bit reluctantly,
Yes.
and I'm being a little bit cryptic on what those activities are. But at the end, I'm like, man, I'm actually really glad I did that, right? I'm really glad that she put the emphasis and pushed me to do it, because I'll never regret putting the time aside to do it.
That is so worth saying, because there's a lot of things that are good for us
Mm-hmm.
that we don't feel like doing. That you're not going to get these great feelings or this amazing, aha or magical whatever to motivate you to do things that are good for you, like exercising or whatever, or service or whatever it is. But
so I'm going to change topics and go back to something you referenced earlier. I guess I want to pose the question to you guys. In your minds, if you're looking at a service provider, right, whether it's a mortgage loan officer or anybody else, who do you think is more successful? Someone who has the knowledge or someone who is consistent?
Yeah, the consistent one every time.
See, and I would agree with you 100%. Sometimes people have the knowledge, but they're just grossly inconsistent. They kind of go and go with the flow, right? The wind blows them around. Versus those that are consistent, maybe not to the extreme that you're talking about, overly rigid, but making those phone calls, just that little bit more of a grinder mentality. They will gain the reps, and the reps will give them the knowledge. But so many guys in my industry lose that consistency, and they stop being relevant.
Well, and makes me think of my moving company and my team, right? A lot of times the guys that are the strongest, like let's say you wanted to paint the toughest, strongest guy, on a good day, he's the best guy, but he shows up late, or he's a complainer, or he causes drama, right? I want the guy, I don't care if that guy could beat him on his best day. I want the guy who's going to show up every day on time, take care of the team, take care of the customer, even if he's not as strong as that first guy. You want the consistent guy. Same thing with sports athletes, right? You'd rather have a quarterback that's going to get you the same thing every time, and then you can build a team around him, than one that can have a great game, but then is going to throw a bunch of picks to Nick. So it applies in everything. Yeah. And they say, discipline beats motivation. A lot of times people preach motivation, but lately people have been preaching, motivation can be fleeting if you don't have discipline to match it, right?
Totally agree.
So those are all powerful
good
things.
Takeaways.
Yeah, those are great, and even just to yourself as well. So this is kind of in a different direction, but on what we were talking about earlier. and this might be also a dumb question but it's like, I'm thinking, how much money does someone need to make in order to buy a house?
It's not as much about how much they make; it's how much they spend, right? So I mean, both play a factor. So when I meet with a client and they're say a first time home buyer, I usually draw out a picture for them, and because mortgages, when you hear about them, are intimidating. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. Some in your control, some out of your control. But it helps me just kind of keep the conversation fluid, and I draw out a little piece of paper that says everything that we're going to document, every question that we have for you is going to fall into three categories: credit, income, and assets. I kind of draw them out as little buckets or categories on a piece of paper, and I make my notes as I ask questions kind of in those categories on the piece of paper. But when someone qualifies, it's really a relationship between the debt load that they have showing up on their credit report and their income. Those two combined creates a debt to income ratio. Most lenders want to see about 45% or below of the overall income going towards debt. So when someone's looking to qualify, it's quite simple. You calculate the monthly income, times it by 45%, subtract out everything on the credit report as monthly payments. Whatever is left over is what you can qualify for a mortgage. Okay. It's a lot simpler than people realize, right?
Yeah.
But the key to that is not going out and doubling your income from $100,000 to $200,000. It's usually stop taking on debt, right?
Yeah.
Retire your debt rather than adding debt on. I went to a conference not too long ago, and the conference highlighted some stats. And it was kind of interesting for me. It was a paradigm shift, even someone who's working in the financial industries. It doesn't matter how much money you're making, your debt load is about the same, right? The school teacher, the school teacher and police officer with combined income are spending 45% of their debt. Well, so is the doctor and the lawyer, right?
Yeah.
It's amazing how people just step up their debt load as their income streams increase. It's actually kind of sad.
Yeah.
But it's true. That's what's happening.
Yeah.
So what advice do you give to us then?
In which regard? Be more specific.
In that, just with like to posture ourselves financially.
To prepare yourself to be a little bit better financially. My wife's uncle works in California, makes a lot of more, makes really good money for California wages, right? And he jokingly talks about, it's not so much how much you make, but it's how much you can hold on to. It's kind of like a faucet, right? And as you put your hands out, it's how much can you cup and hold and keep without it spilling over and doing it.
Totally.
So I say, try to train yourself for delayed gratification, right? Something that I don't know where this developed, but I try not to buy something the first time I see it. If I'm in Target and my wife sees a T-shirt on the end cap and goes, "Oh my gosh, I love that T-shirt, I want it." Like, well, it's really not what we came for. And if you want to buy it, buy it. But I would recommend, you're going to be here at Target next week. Why don't you wait till next week? And if you want it as bad the second time you see it, then don't think twice, buy it. But 9 times out of 10, if we delay that purchase, even just a few days, even a week, it's amazing how much that desire to buy it goes away. So one takeaway for me is, if you can wait, if you can let it sit in your cart with your online shopping, right, you'll probably talk yourself out of buying it.
I love that advice.
Lauren, are you listening? Let it sit in the online cart.
So I'm a little bit on the opposite side that I probably delay too much. There's been a couple times in my marriage with my wife that she's like, if you look at that spotting scope at Sportsman's Warehouse one more time, I'm going to go crazy. Just buy it, for crying out loud, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But I also have a hard time spending money on myself. I'm more willing to say for my kids, for my wife, want to be more of a yes man for those type of purchases, right? But you can't have delayed gratification for too long. You still got to enjoy life, but you just got to do it. You just got to do it in a smart way.
I think it's a good principle. It's like a discipline we're talking about, something that everyone can do today to help sift out those random things that we don't need to buy.
Yeah.
Just trail it a little bit, right? I don't know if it's 3 years or 4 years or whatever, but what you could spend now, wait 3 years to spend that much. And so as your income, as your means goes up, you can spend more, but don't spend it all. Like, just have it trail you enough that you have money for investments and money for bucket list items, money for rainy day, right?
Yeah.
I think as you go up, as you do better and better, like, you can afford to spend more, but you need to make sure that it trails you far enough that you have a cushion.
I think that's a great point. And another example would be a car, right? If you took every car that you've owned and made a commitment that you're going to drive it 1 year longer than you did, how many cycles of cars did you cut off the end, right?
Yeah.
How many tens of thousands of dollars did you save by just driving every car that you've owned 1 more year? Like that's just, you're not asking like never, right?
Yes.
It's just stretching it a little bit more.
Well, I love it. I think that's really, really great advice for a lot of people in delaying. And I'm a lot like you. Like, I like to save. I've always been that way. I've always been trying to be safe, and I've always tried to follow certain principles like that, with like hating spending money on myself. But some of that trickled into, like, when I was talking about earlier, when I was working for my dad, we were building these, we were subcontractor, but we were doing work on these Salisbury homes out by the airport, the single family homes. And it's like, I could have gotten one of those. They're like 4-bed, kind of like a townhome, but they're separated. Mm-hmm. And at the time, I could have gotten in one of those for like $220,000 or $230,000. And those things are worth like $450 right now. And like, I didn't, because I'm like, save, delay, like all this, you know what I mean? Like, there's a balance, and maybe you guys can correct me on that.
Well,
but it's like that internal who I am. It just prevented me from taking action on something that probably would have been really smart.
My wife has a grandma who's 96, 97. And she has accumulated a very nice net worth for herself. But she also was raised in the Depression, right? Mm-hmm. Where they've stretched everything to last to the extreme, because there was always this scarcity mindset that we don't know when we will go without again. And she still, even though she's worth a big chunk of money, we're talking, multimillionaire, is unwilling to buy new pillows to go on. I mean, we're talking pillows that are decades old, right?
Yikes.
And so where is that line of delaying it to be smart, to get your trajectory of investments and get that wealth building, right? Yeah. And then having it go too extreme. So I've let that be an example for me of, there comes a point where you need to enjoy life. You need to enjoy the wealth and the good financial decisions that you've made.
Yeah. Well, I saw that with my own grandpa. He had similar to that, but when he passed away, they found cash everywhere. But like, he would never wanted to spend.
Treasure.
Well, yeah, it's just, he never wanted to spend ever. It was just like, and he lived the entire life just never ever spending anything. And there's money in the freezer. There's money in the, like, I'm not kidding when I said that. You're like, what was the point? I mean, you could have just used it and enjoyed it, and it's gone now. And you can't take it with you.
That's cold, hard cash.
Literally. No, but I think that comes back to the vision. I think that's the clarity of where you're going, what you're trying to accomplish. I hope, part of my wife and I, our goal is to leave a legacy, and we feel there's certain things that we are very passionate about and that we would love to pass on some wealth to, right? It's not just to children, right? Not just passing it on within the family legacy, but I think it also helps you make good financial decisions on that when there's a purpose that has meaning, that there's passion behind, to make those decisions. So I think it's important to still have money left over, right? Yes, you can't take it with you, but if you have a vision of where you want that to go and what good it can do in the world, allows you to stay focused, but have fun along the way, right?
Yeah. As we, as we wrap, I know you gotta next appointment, but maybe give us one more takeaway that would apply to anyone, not just someone as an entrepreneur or in the looking at mortgages. But you talked about your legacy. What's one thing that you want people to apply in their life or remember always?
Or remember always.
What would you say?
Or thinking of your kids. What advice would you give them?
Yeah, talk to your kids for 1 minute.
What advice would you give them
Talk to my kids.
right now?
Here's a random thought that comes to mind when you ask that question. What's the most important principle I want my kids to learn and adopt is work ethic. I feel like it doesn't matter what comes at you at life. If you have the ability to have work ethic, if you're run into financial problems, get a second job, work harder, right? You're having trouble with your marriage, work on it, right? We're members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and its testimonies are also discussed. If you're struggling with your testimony, work at it, right?
Yeah.
It parlays into almost every aspect of life. If you're willing to have a work ethic and be willing to put forth the work, you can navigate any problem that comes.
Absolutely. I think just kind of adding on hard work gets you through a lot, right? In the bad times, hard work can help you survive. And in the good times, we want to learn how to work smart, but hard work amplifies working smart. So you never can discount the value of just work ethic, any situation in life.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, it's been amazing getting to know you better. I think we've talked about some really cool stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be leaving different today. Things I need to change in my life for sure. So thanks for coming on and being who you are and being a mentor to everyone around you, to Ben and this for me and those that are listening. So we really appreciate having you on.
Well, I appreciate you having me.
Thanks for taking that 23-year-old under your wing.
Well, as we wrap, again, pay it forward, right?
Yeah. That's another great episode of the Beyond Net Worth podcast.